On this episode of Soul 02, we're going to be talking about multi-directional faith, or what it means to have faith for yesterday, for today, and for tomorrow on Soul 02. And welcome to Soul 02. This is the podcast that's putting the oxygen back into the Christian life, one soul at a time. And so glad to be with you. And I want to thank those of you who are watching or who listen to it on the podcast. And I welcome you to visit our website at soul02.com, where we have articles and audio and video podcasts through YouTube. So good to be with you today. And this has been really on my heart to talk about faith that kind of transcends time, meaning past, present, and future. And there was a prophet named Samuel in the scriptures who, it says that in 1 Samuel 7:12, he took a stone and set it up between two towns, Mizpah and Jeshanah. And he named the stone Ebenezer. And this is what it meant. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. And there was something about when God helped people in ancient times that they would literally set up a stone of memorial as a testament to God's faithfulness. And this is what Samuel did, and this is what we need to learn to do in our day that we live in. Things are only going to get more difficult in life for all of us, in some way or another. The older you get, it just changes, and we go through trials and tribulations. So we have to learn what it means to have radical faith that is able to look back, present, and forward, and still believe, and still hold on to hope, and still hold on to God. And this is what I mean by multi-directional faith. Faith for yesterday, faith for today, and faith for tomorrow. So faith doesn't just go in the direction of today. Faith is multi-directional. It covers every direction of our life, past, present, and future. And maybe you're asking, well, why do I need faith for the past? The past is the past. It's done. Well, is it? Is the past done with some people? Have you ever seen people who were stuck in the past? People who lived in the past? People who couldn't get beyond their past? And this is what I mean today by multi-directional faith. Faith that transcends generations and transcends time. And so think about faith for yesterday, right? The past. And Samuel said, thus far, meaning so far God has brought us this far, right? And we too sometimes look back when we turn around and remember a beautiful journey we took, or a lovely experience we had, or even something tragic that we went through. We look back sometimes with happiness or with pain or with struggle or with questions. And the point is how do you look back at your past? Samuel looked back at what God had done for Israel by God delivering Israel from their enemies. And so Samuel said, you know what? God has been so faithful. So I'm going to set up this stone as a memorial to God's faithfulness. So what happens when you look back through your own eyes instead of through God's hopeful eyes? Well, here's what happens. Often we look back, right? I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. Some people look back and all they see is pain. All they see is loss. All they see is rejection or abandonment or disappointment or trouble or tragedy. And some of us, maybe the way we're wired, fixate on the past to the point where we become paralyzed against the future. And we can't move forward because we're living out of time in our minds. And some of us can't even live in the present because of that. But some are stuck in the past and they're unable to live right now because they've never learned what it really means to have faith for the now, as well as faith for the past. And so an old saint once said, he put it this way. He says, through lack, through wealth, through sickness, through health, at home, away, in honor, in dishonor, in confusion, in clarity, in failure, in triumph, in prayer, in testing, in loss, in gain. Thus far, the Lord has helped us. Here's the point. The road looks so different when you see it through God's eyes versus when you dwell on it through your own eyes. And trust me when I tell you, I've done this in my own life where I lost sight of God and started to look at the past or something that happened to me through painful eyes, or eyes of loss, or eyes of rejection. And then I had to reorient myself to seeing it God's way. Because when God shows you something through his eyes, it is through the eyes of a loving Father who cares about your life and who says, I have a purpose for you. So that's faith for the past. We need to give up the past and surrender it to God. But there's also a faith for today, thus far, right? For today. In other words, the thus far looks back and finds grace, not just for yesterday, not just to surrender what was and to give God the pains of the past, but it finds grace for today. It finds power for today and enablement for today. What good is any faith if it doesn't help you in the now? It's okay last week or last month, but what about now? And some of us need faith right now, right this very moment. You need faith. You need God to break through for something. Now, some are living right now, minute by minute. And this has happened to me. I don't know if it's happened to you. Maybe you could put that in the notes. You could leave a comment. But have you ever had such a trial in your life that you felt like you were living minute by minute, that you were afraid that any minute you could just lose it, you could just explode or have a breakdown? Or maybe you're living hour by hour. But the point is that some of us, we are really struggling and kind of crawling and trying to get through. And God doesn't expect us to accomplish impossible things in our life. He only expects us to believe, and he'll do the impossible. That's the whole point of having minute by minute faith, that where you can't do it, he can and he will. If you believe him, if you trust him. Hebrews tells us, the book of Hebrews tells us, faith is the substance of things hoped for. What does that mean? It sounds fancy and it sounds really spiritual, but what does it mean? The faith God gives us has real dimensions to it. It has essence. It has the basis for the now. It's substantial. And this is what I mean by faith for the now. It's not just you're hoping for something, to happen, but how do you know you have faith now? I remember praying once about something that was heavy on my heart. And I just really went to God with all my heart. And I said, God, I can't do this. And, the A, B's, and C's of it. When I got up from that prayer, I knew in my heart that God took care of it and was taking care of it. And this is what I mean by faith for the now, that you have it right now and you know it enough to rest and to have peace over it. God can give you faith for the now. But then there's also faith for tomorrow, right? Remember, this is multi-directional. It's past, present, and future. Thus far, the future now, right? So the thus far looks at now and finds grace also in what will be. That's the encouraging thing when you have breakthroughs now in this moment, that you can say, you know what, if God can do this now, think about what he can do in the future. And this is why we must never forget what he did in the past. We need to document it, write it down so you won't forget it, so that you realize that when you're in the present, you say, wait a minute, thus far, he got me that far. He's going to get me across the finish line. When one travels from, let's say, New York to Florida, and you stop at the Carolinas and you called your loved ones, they said, where are you? Well, I've gotten this far so far, right? Or thus far. And this is how the journey is in life, in a way, that there's a lot of road left for all of us. And there's weather, there's traffic, there might be accidents along the way, there might be stops along the way, there might be weird navigational turns along the way. But the point is, thus far, that if God has gotten you thus far, then it means he's going to get you through the rest, because he's faithful. So there's more trials, without question. We're all going to have more trials. There are more victories. There are more challenges. There are more breakthroughs. There are more fears, more joys, more losses, but there's also more abundance. There are health issues, but there are also more healings and breakthroughs if we believe, if we trust in him. So I will not fear the what will be because of God's thus far. Because he's gotten me across this far, he's going to be faithful until the end. So here's a question that I want to ask you today. And maybe you can make a comment on this. How do you see the long road you have traveled? How do you see what was? How do you see the past? And how do you see your present? Are you struggling now? How are you looking at your future? Do you feel anxious about it or afraid? Now, one of my favorite people to read is a woman called Hannah Whitall Smith. And she lived in the 1800s and she died in 1911. And she wrote a great devotional, which is a book for, for people who follow Christ, that have stories and scriptures of God's faithfulness. And so here's one way to look at her life. And this is her history of what happened to her. Hannah lost 3 of her 6 children in the prime of their youth or childhood. Her husband, Robert, had manic depression, and it always hung over him and the family like a cloud, and it caused all kinds of problems and challenges. And Robert stopped following Christ and became an agnostic, right? He kind of said, well, we can't really know whether there's a God or not, even though his wife was a great woman of faith and miracles, and she traveled the world. Hannah's children followed in their father's footsteps, and they too lost their faith, their mother, and their childhood. One daughter, Mary, finally deserted her husband, and she left her children with Hannah, the grandmother, to raise. And she met some man in Italy who was a famous historian and married him. Hannah had to rear the grandchildren, and Alyssa became the first wife of Bernard Russell, who also was swept into the agnosticism of that age. And Logan, another son, became a professor of English literature at Oxford University and a moderately famous author. He never married, and having inherited his father's genes, he went insane towards the older days of his life. That's one way to look at Hannah's life. But here's another way to look at her life, through God's eyes. For every trial Hannah had, she also had a major triumph. Her book, The Christian's Secret of a Happy Life, for many years was the most read devotional book in the world. She became a noted preacher and lecturer, as well as a leader in the temperance movement. She fought for women's rights, Native American rights, and other social causes, both in America and in England. And through all of this, Hannah maintained her faith in God and his love for her and for everybody. She learned the secret long ago, that her faith is unshaken when she puts it in God. And God was omnipotent, God was love, and that was enough for her. And she had committed herself to him, meaning God, unreservedly and regardless. Many years before, it had included her sorest disappointments as well as her greatest accomplishments. It was all married together, because God says, I work all things for good to those that love me. Because there's never joy without pain in life, right? So we learn how to marry them together and let God deal with it. It was all in his hands, and he would do what was best for her. So faith for yesterday, today, and tomorrow is the kind of faith that cannot be shaken, because it has weathered all those things, and it will weather those things. It can't be shaken because it's already been shaken. That's the beauty of it. So which path will you believe? Which path will you choose? How will you choose to look at it? Will you believe that the same God who brought you thus far, as Samuel said, will bring you to the end of your purpose in your life? Or will you keep seeing it in your way? The same faith that kept you will keep you today and tomorrow. This is why the Bible calls Jesus, Hebrews 12:2 calls Jesus the perfecter, the pioneer, and the perfecter of our faith. The faith came from him, not from me. I can't create faith. He implants faith in me through seed. And so I'd like to encourage you to continue to follow him with all that is within you. Follow him. Don't give up. Let God do his work in you. Whatever happens in your life, let God continue to work. Let him continue to bring you through, just as he has in the past. And if you don't think he has, look again. Look again, because sometimes our view can become tainted. So if you like this podcast, please leave a comment, ring the bell, and subscribe. It'd be great to connect with you. And we just love doing these, and we hope it's blessing somebody. So until next time, God bless.